Stephen Interviews You. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Stephen Interviews You. This is episode number 19. And this is basically a series where I just sit down and have a good chat with a special guest. And his name would be, introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, my name is Darayus Sethna, recent graduate of Ohio University. Just graduated from OU in this past May. Majored in journalism with the Honors Tutorial College. Also did minors in Spanish, sport management, and coaching education. I worked primarily as a sports reporter at WOUB Public Media, was a news anchor, reported on a variety of sports during my time in Athens. Started at the Post as a beat reporter for the Bobcats field hockey team. Done everything from podcasting, like I said, news anchoring, so many different things. So definitely super grateful for the 4 years I spent at Ohio University. Had so many amazing experiences while I was in Athens, met so many great people, and super excited to be here with you, Stephen. And what you're doing is awesome. Just promoting the Bobcats. Love your passion for Ohio University and all things Bobcats. So it's great to be with you here today.
Yeah, and leading up to this is the first time that I'm actually interviewing somebody associated with Ohio University. So this is definitely a big event for me too. So getting started, Darius, could you, for a backstory, what got you into sports in the first place? What got you motivated to do things like journalism, like cover sports, college sports? What really got it going for you?
Really, I would say, Stephen, it stems all the way back to my days in middle school. I'm originally from the Cleveland area. I live about 25 minutes south of Cleveland, and I remember attending my first Cleveland Cavaliers game back in January of 2016. And, ever since that 2016 game, I started following the team, and that happened to be the year they won the whole NBA championship, had the historic 3-1 comeback against the Golden State Warriors. And then from there, really my passion for basketball. Basketball is my favorite sport, and I would say my passion for basketball in the NBA ultimately created what my current passion is for sports. And throughout my when I was younger in school, I always was that one kid in the class who loved to give presentations. No one else in my classes were they were nervous or just didn't like to speak up in front of a crowd. I always loved it. I grew up in a household. My mom was a teacher and my dad was a lawyer. So in my house, you kind of had to be a good public speaker to get your points across. So I kind of merged my passion for public speaking along with my eventual love for sports, and decided sports journalism is going to be probably the best path for me in life. So that really started in high school when I began a weekly sports podcast covering my high school teams, local sports in Cleveland, all those sorts of things. I was a play-by-play broadcaster for my high school basketball team, boys team, and then that passion just kept going and going. And when I got to OU, and once I got to Athens, Stephen, that really opened my knowledge and got me covering sports on a completely different level. That's really as I was studying journalism at OU, the EW Scripps School of Journalism is such a phenomenal school. Not only just sports reporting, but general reporting. You learn about like so many different facets of journalism and how they apply to kind of your niche, and my niche being sports. So it really opened up a whole new world for me. I got to start doing interviews. I got to, like I said, I went on nightly newscasts as a sports anchor. I covered, college athletics. My time covering OU athletics was really my first taste of covering college athletics, but, being professional about it too, doing the interviews, making videos, the editing process. I really immersed myself in the world of journalism during my time at Ohio University. And that's, kind of led to where we are today. So I'm currently in graduate school. I'm at another MAC school, Kent State University, a little bit closer to home. Working in communications now. My time at OU, I got to interact with a lot of people in the Bobcats athletic communications department. So learning a little bit about that side of things here now at Kent State. But yeah, really that the the beginnings were back in middle school at a Cleveland Cavs game, and it's really just propelled me to where I am today, and just following that same passion for journalism and sports. So time has flown by. I can't believe how fast it's all gone by, but it's definitely been all great, so many great experiences along the way for sure.
Yeah. So sticking to sports reporting, you have worked, as you said, as a multimedia sports reporter at WOUB in Athens. Could you tell me what that experience, just that experience alone, was like? Getting used to being in front of a camera for WOUB, just the entire process. What take me through that because I'm not familiar with that. What
Yeah,
is that like? Yeah.
WUB was awesome. It really is. So for those who might not be fully aware, WUB is an NPR station, a PBS affiliate based in Athens. So it's essentially a professional news station that is run by students. We do have, a lot of legitimate professionals in there, our editor in chief. We have other individuals who work there full time who kind of help the students out. But for the most part, it's students going on and reporting on issues, whether that's, local, government meetings in Athens, covering Ohio University events, local events in the community. In my case, I was covering a lot of events for Bobcat athletics. We had sports reporters going out to high schools throughout Southeast Ohio, covering high school football, basketball, volleyball, pretty much everything. So that's really what WOUB is and is all about. So that was one of my first opportunities, one of the first things I wanted to get involved in back in 2021 in the fall when I got to campus. And what I love about WOUB is they offer so many different things to do. So, I was in front of a camera a lot, whether it was in a news studio, whether it was out in the field. But then I also got to do some podcasting, learn a little bit more about the ins and outs of that. I got to do some script writing. That's where I also really learned a lot about the video editing process, kind of the back end of journalism work. You go out, do all your filming, record all your interviews, but then you've got to pull it all together. Then you've got to pull it all together to tell that story, and that's all in the editing process. So I really ingratiated myself with that. So when I think about WUB, I obviously think about all the friendships and the connections I made there, in my 4 years. But I think also just how well-rounded of an experience it was, just to try so many different things. It really was an awesome experience. And if there's anyone at Ohio University who's interested in reporting or journalism of any sort, I definitely would recommend WOUB. It was a great starting point for me as I've continued to build my career.
Yeah, for me, it's fascinating when I hear stories of people who have done reporting of any kind, sports or otherwise. Like previously, I interviewed Tony Reale. He worked for so long for ESPN, so I can tell, right now that there's just that level of enthusiasm that you
Yeah.
guys have for this. Just from that interview and what I'm hearing now, it's just fascinating. So I
Yep.
always like it when I hear that. So let's get to Ohio University itself, Ohio University Athens, because this is what we've both been covering for a long time now. Your time there, what is it like? The entire thing, not just sports, but just being there. What is the feeling like? And do you have like any favorite moments in particular just being there at Ohio University?
I think what makes Ohio University special is that I really see it as like the quintessential example of a college campus, right? Everything's, close, tightly packed. I feel what's great about OU specifically is it's big enough where you can find new opportunities, meet a bunch of new different people, get involved in a variety of different things, but it's also still small enough where you still feel like there's a sense of community. You still feel like you're part of a community where you can make a difference, you feel welcomed, and that extends out to Athens as well. And during my 4 years at OU, not only was I involved on the campus, but I also got to collaborate and meet some of the local people in Athens. I also, along with WUB, worked at the local radio station in Athens, WXTQ Power 105. Did some stuff for their sports department. So met a lot of local people who worked at the station there. Got to go to a bunch of different high schools throughout Southeast Ohio in my 4 years and really got to see how the high school sports, particularly Friday night football, meant to so many of those communities around Southeast Ohio. But I think, going back to your question about Athens specifically, it really was the people, the locals. I got to, as part of my coaching education minor, I got to do some coaching for a youth basketball program at the Athens Community Center, where I interacted with, local kids, parents, other coaches. That was a really awesome experience. But then, yeah, so just going, whether it was the OU campus specifically, or Athens, I just felt this great sense of community. And a lot of people had, this sense of pride for Athens and OU that I really think is unmatched. And, people are proud to be from Southeast Ohio, from Athens. And I think when you see a figure like a Joe Burrow, who, wears it on his sleeve, right, that he's from Athens, and then you see the pride just in general that the people of Athens and the OU community have. It's really special, and something that I'll always take away.
Yeah. So the next question I would have, because this does relate to Ohio University, is how I discovered you. That website called bobcatarchives.com.
Yeah.
Now, here's the question first off. What was the specific motivation for you to start building that website? And what is it that you basically learned from doing that, from creating that website and gathering all this information?
Yeah, that was bobcatarchives.com. Just a kind of a shameless plug here, but if you haven't visited it, make sure you go www.bobcatarchives.com. So that was a thesis project that I did this past academic year, 2024-25. As I mentioned earlier, I was part of the honors tutorial college program when I was at Ohio University, and a requirement for students of the honors program is that they have to complete a senior thesis. So it's doing research and then essentially a mega project that you spend the entire academic year working on. And because the honors program has so many different majors, from sciences to the arts to people like me in journalism, there were so many different projects and themes you could tackle. So I stuck to my skills in journalism, and I think what motivated me to start creating the website was I knew I had a lot of experience covering OU Bobcat sports, from doing interviews, meeting different athletes, talking with coaches, just ingratiating myself in green and white athletics, which was awesome. So I knew I had a lot of knowledge in that. I also have a big love for history. I remember in second grade, I could remember all the presidents' names in order. So I've always just had this passion for history and storytelling. So I really meshed those two passions together, and it kind of led me to going to the Ohio University archives and Alden Library on campus. And I got to collaborate with the head archivist there, Bill Kimmock, who's been at Ohio University for a long, long time, is one of the most knowledgeable people I've ever met, knows everything about OU history in Athens right off the top of his head. He can tell you so fast. He's phenomenal, and he was great to work with. And I told him about my interest. I'm looking on telling some stories about the history of OU Bobcat athletics. I want to tell the stories of these specific teams, about these specific people. And Bill was great in leading me in the right direction, gave me a lot of material to just look at, to read from. And then he also gave me some other ideas, including doing a biography about Dr. Arthur Carr, who studied at Ohio University in the early 1900s and was the first African-American quarterback for the Ohio Bobcats. So I got to go on that trail and do a lot of research there. So ultimately, at the end of the day, it was my passion for obviously storytelling as a journalist, but I think kind of reviving some old stories of Bobcat lore and using archival photos, videos, whatever it was, to tell those stories and bring those stories back to life. Because OU has been around. Obviously, we wear it proud on our sleeves since 1804, and Ohio Bobcat athletics has been around for a long, long time. And I just thought it'd be really cool to take a deep dive in the history of some of OU's most iconic sports teams, and ultimately build a website that people can go on forever now and learn and share with others. So It was definitely one of my proudest moments putting this project together. I put a lot of work into it, a lot of research, a lot of interviews, a lot of time on the back end, just writing, scripting, editing, so many different things. And I'm so glad and happy it turned out the way that it did.
Yeah, it's just when I first came across that website and I looked through all the pages of that website, I was just very impressed, to say the least, very
Appreciate it.
impressed by
Appreciate you
it.
having a look at it, all of it. Yeah.
And obviously, for me, I follow the football program very closely. So when I checked out the 1968 perfect season part of the website, that just it really it definitely sparked my interest. And going into that, this would be my next question. When gathering information about the 1968 Ohio Bobcats football team, excuse me, um, what are your thoughts on the research specifically for that? What are some of the things that you had an idea that you're gonna gather, but also other things that you may not have been aware of?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting because the 1968 team, that whole section was one of the first parts of the website that I started working on. I remember I started working on that section back in early September, and that was when I was still getting acclimated with the archives, still learning about how everything worked and how I still didn't have a great idea of how I was gonna put the website together. But once I got a lot of materials on the 1968 team. I really just started reading through everything. I particularly used the 1968. They had a little media booklet, media guide with basically all the information on all the coaches' profiles. Bill Hess, the head coach at the time, some of the star players on the team. Some of the names I can't come across right now. It's been a while. It's been over a year, which is crazy. But that's really where the engine started to run a little bit in my brain in terms of how I was going to get this going. So I figured the best way to really tell the story of the team was giving an overview of the season, what happened, but then taking a deeper dive into some of the profiles. So going into head coach Bill Hess, learning about it's funny because I actually have the website pulled up here just to remember what I was talking about. But Clev Bryant, the quarterback, Todd Snyder, star wide receiver on the team, who was actually a native of Athens, was really cool. So did some player profiles and breakdowns on those guys, and then I wanted to also on that page I talked about some of the key games of Ohio season that obviously they finished perfect in that season, finished 10-0, got a trip to a bowl game. So I wanted to go through some of, the big moments throughout that season. Obviously Battle of the Bricks against Miami and, big win for the Bobcats earlier this week. And Battle of the Bricks, always good to get that victory over the Red Hawks. But yeah, so I figured I'd tell the story of some of OU's most important games and meaningful games during that season. And then 1968 was also a big year because that was the year the famous Convocation Center was being built and eventually opened to the public. So not only was it a monumental year for OU Bobcats football on the field, but it was also a huge year for OU in general. As the Convo is one of the most iconic buildings, if not the most iconic building on OU's campus. And so on that page, that 1968 football team page, I wanted to include some pictures of the convo being constructed that I got from the university archives. So that was really neat to see. So yeah, really just getting all the information from the archives. I can't express how grateful I am for how much they really helped me. I just asked them what they had, they threw it all at me, and I just embraced the research and started reading through everything. And kind of as a journalist, you kind of have to pick and choose what you is the most relevant and important information, and that's ultimately what I tried to do. So, but yeah, it's funny you bring that page up because that was one of the first pages I worked on for the creation of this website.
Yeah. So doing historical research, obviously 1968 being one of the best years in Ohio Bobcats football history. Um, Knowing what you know about that history, um, if you could, what would be like the number two option if you could create its own page? What would be the number two like year that you would dedicate a page to?
It's interesting. I might have to go back. Obviously, I think 2024 was a super special year, but I know Clev Bryant became the after his playing career, he came back to OU and was the head coach for the 1985 or 86 season. I have it here. Yeah, 1985 is when he came back to become the head coach for Ohio Bobcats football. Became just the third African American head football coach in NCAA Division I history. So I think I'd probably want to do if I could choose another year, maybe 1985, 86. What were those years like? What was how did Clev Bryant fare? What were maybe some of the stories there? What was obviously with Clev Bryant passing away, but what was kind of optically what was going on at that time? So maybe I would probably do something mid '80s if I could choose to choose another year.
Yeah. So let's see here. So going into Ohio University, uh, just basically when you go through the campus, what are some of the best spots? What are some of the best places just to, you know, like grab a bite to eat or just hang out, have conversations with other people? Uh, just take me like through a tour of this. What would be good spots to go to?
Man, I don't think I have enough fingers on my hand the hands to tell you, but really there are some really awesome spots. And what I love about just OU and Athens in general, there are so many local spots, family-owned spots, whether they're restaurants, other general stores. And that's something that I really appreciate and enjoy. I would say in terms of restaurants, I went out to eat a decent amount when I was at OU. Top of my head's got to be Union Street Diner, very close to the Convocation Center, very close to main campus. But had some great breakfast food. Milkshakes are probably the best I've ever had in my life, even to this day. I'll be quite honest with you. It was a place that if I ever had family or friends visiting town, we'd always go there because I knew it was going to be a great spot. Star of India. I'm half Indian. I grew up eating Indian food, so I would say that's another good spot for me. Very very solid Indian food there. And I'm a big fan of the coffee shops too in Athens,
Yeah.
particularly Donkey Coffee. That's obviously the big one on campus. So I always would go there with study with friends, meet up, or if I just needed a coffee break, that was probably the spot to go. Brennan's, which is also right on Court Street, on the main campus, close to campus there. Definitely another spot. They had some great sandwiches. Met up there for classes a couple of times. So yeah. And then I think what's great about all those places too, Stephen, is they're all local. So you're supporting local businesses. I know some students were working there to make some extra money. So and you always saw familiar faces in all those spots. So yeah, I would say there are probably more that I can't think about right now, but those are definitely the big ones that come to mind.
Yeah. I'm so glad you mentioned coffee because I'm very much a big fan of coffee.
Yes,
It's
me
one
too.
of the it's I'm always having it in the morning, and so I'm always mixing and matching what kind of coffee I'm going to have. So yeah, I've been doing research on Athens, Ohio for coffee, and it's like yeah, places I definitely got to go to.
Yes, yeah. Donkey Coffee is definitely at the top of my list, and I think it's at the top of most people's list there for sure.
Yeah. So sticking with that theme a little bit, for game day, no matter what the sport is, uh, what is like the atmosphere? What is the atmosphere like for tailgating or for just preparing anything just like right before game time starts in Athens, Ohio?
Yeah, and it's funny because I for most of the time when I was at OU, I'd go to games as a reporter. I would go to games, a couple games sometimes for fun, be with friends. But a lot of the games I went to, I was had a journalistic mindset, if you will. So, but just observing just the atmosphere, you can tell no matter the team's record, people are going to show up. And I think that's just what makes Bobcat athletics so special. I think the fact that, Athens and OU, you're not really near a major city in a sense. Columbus is, like what, half hour and a half away, so outside of Athens, there's not obviously a whole ton in terms of you know other things to do. And I think that's what, the high school sports, particularly Bobcat sports, really brings a lot of people together. And I think what's so special about Bobcat sports too is you'll get a lot of locals who maybe are from the surrounding towns in Athens, coming to the convo, going to Peden Stadium because they bleed green and white, which is awesome. So you see a lot of alum too. I think that's a big thing. I always used to see a bunch of OU alum, not just for homecoming games or senior nights, but year round. And I think that was really cool to see too. So I just think that the power that sports had, particularly in Athens and for the OU community, was really special. And I think the Miami weeks, whether it was football, field hockey, basketball, you name it, it always felt like those weeks there was a little extra energy. So it was super fun to be a reporter in those atmospheres and getting to represent OU and Athens in that way. And that really is why I took so much pride in telling the stories as thoroughly as I could, as accurately as I could, because I wanted to represent the OU and Athens community with the utmost pride. So
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned the Battle of the Bricks rivalry between Ohio and Miami of Ohio, because I'm going to start mentioning that a little bit here. Um, yeah, so you were there last year in Athens, Ohio, for 2024, the run that the Ohio Bobcats went on for
yep.
football. Um, what was that like? What was that entire run like from start to finish? Because I was there too from a distance. I mean, not in Athens, but I was there, covering the Bobcats. What was it like being there, just watching everything progress that the way that it did, with ultimately being a MAC championship for the Bobcats?
Yeah, it was super cool because I think it was just so unexpected. It felt like the team, it took a little bit of time for them to, at the beginning of the season, to kind of get things going. They looked clunky at times. And then, I think it was actually they were at Miami last year and they got blown out. I think after that game is really when I noticed just a tick in the team. It kind of just seemed that loss, it pulled the team together and they just started winning games and they went on this crazy run. It was really awesome that I had the opportunity in my 4 years there to watch both Curtis Rourke and Parker Navarro just ascend as quarterbacks. Sam Wigluss, the wide receiver, got to interview him in a podcast we did there at WOUB. But yeah, going into that 2024 season, the expectations weren't that high for the football team. And I think once they started reeling off games, people started, we started talking about it, especially in the journalism building, in the sports department. We were saying this team might be able to go on a run. They might be able to make something happen here. So it was really cool, just the fact that the expectations were low to start the year. And then as the year continued, this momentum kept building and building, and ultimately we had people bussing up and driving up to Detroit to witness history. And what better team to witness history, get the win against than Miami of Ohio, the team that I think kind of ignited that run for the Bobcats that year. So definitely a special season. As I said, I was kind of telling you before we started the interview here, as I was working on my project, the 1968 football team, I kind of had this idea in mind: is okay, football is probably not going to win the MAC championship this year, so that 1968 team will still be the last time OU won a MAC championship. And the Bobcats last year just kept winning and winning, and I got to witness the first OU MAC championship since 1968 as I was working on the 1968 team. So that was a really cool kind of come full circle moment for me. And definitely you could tell campus was buzzing when they won that MAC championship.
Yeah. For me, it was special for many reasons, because I was just getting started covering the Bobcats myself on my YouTube channel, and just to see how they did, it was just amazing. The whole run last year was amazing, and it just started to, like, you see it back there, that banner behind me.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's really neat.
I mean, I found that at a thrift store one day. I was like, yeah, I gotta get it, and
Yeah.
just what it means to be an Ohio Bobcat, to follow this, to follow this program. It's just it means a lot. So Yeah. So going into back into sports reporting, sports journalism. Um, Currently, you're continuing your academic career with Kent State, right?
Yes.
So since we're talking about Mid-American Conference schools, what are like similarities and differences between schools like Ohio University and Kent State?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you ask someone, you ask anyone that question, all the answers are going to be different. Whether they focus on, the campus vibe. I know a lot of people like to go, Friday night parties, do that sort of thing. So, dorm life, classes. But I think for me, when I think about Mac schools, working in journalism and now here at Kent State working for their athletics department, what I love about the MAC is that it's so hands-on in terms of student experience, right? It's not like an Ohio State or an Alabama, Big Ten school, SEC, Pac-12. It's not these big time universities that are almost like professional sports teams in a sense where they have so many professional people hired in those athletic department, roles, whatever they may be. So it gives in broadcasting too. Broadcasting is a huge one. So when that's the case, the students of those schools don't really have an opportunity to really learn about the nitty gritty of journalism and broadcasting. But at MAC schools like Ohio, Kent State, they need all the students they can get. A lot of these athletics departments, especially in the MAC, are run by students, GAs, volunteers like myself. And I think that's what makes the MAC so awesome is it's essentially, student run. Obviously, you have professionals, doing their thing, in higher up positions, but a lot of these athletic departments, whether it's broadcast, communication, marketing, whatever it may be, they rely on GAs and students to really, uphold their end of the bargain and put in the work and get that experience. So if you ask me, that's what I really take away from having graduated from a Mac school and back doing my master's at a Mac school, is that it's really emphasizes and encourages hands-on opportunities for students that you might not get if you go to a maybe higher level type conference like the Big Ten or the SEC or something like that.
Yeah, I've noticed a difference between uh, power conference schools like what you mentioned, Ohio State, Alabama, and Group of Six, as they call them, conference schools. So you got to have that kind of familiarity. You got to have that kind of like unity. For,
For sure.
so yeah, I can notice the differences. So continuing on with sports journalism, right now, what would be some of your future goals that you have in mind for sports journalism? Where do you see yourself going with sports journalism, like maybe a couple years from now?
Yeah, so I would love to. I think my ultimate goal, and even when I was younger, my goal was to work for the National Basketball Association as a media personality or um, in communications, whatever it is. So I think right now I'm still kind of in the exploratory phase. Here at Kent State, I'm learning a lot more about kind of the internal work of an athletics department, mainly with communications. Where when I was at OU, I was essentially a reporter. I was kind of working for a third party organization covering Ohio, not working for Ohio. Here at Kent State, it's a little bit different. I'm working for Kent State in a sense. So I think for me, I'm still trying to kind of figure out my niche. But I think in terms of reporting, I would my goal would ultimately be to work for the NBA or a professional team, as a media personality, or working for a news station, sports radio. I think that's what's so great about journalism today, Stephen, is that there are so many different options you can go to in journalism. You can work in TV, you can work in radio, you can be a writer, you can work in social media now. There are full-time jobs where you can have opportunities in social media, and that's really opened the door for so many other opportunities like podcasting, what you're doing in streaming. So I think just continue for me, just continuing to gain as many opportunities and learn as much as I can to just continue to build my repertoire, and then hopefully find an opportunity that fits best for me.
Yep. So um, to wrap up uh, this last question that I have, um, what advice would you give to anybody that's looking to get on board any university campus, whether that's Ohio University or anywhere else in the MAC or anywhere else in general? What advice would you have for them when they're trying to prepare for sports journalism or anything related to that? What tips would you give?
Yeah, so I think specifically for someone who's interested in sports journalism, I would just say don't be afraid to get out there and meet people. In sports journalism, it's not necessarily what you know; it's who you know. And I've been so grateful to have made so many connections, whether it's professional connections with other students. Through my connections at OU, I've actually been able to make connections right up here in Cleveland too, with former Bobcats who now live in Cleveland, work at news stations, or are affiliated with OU in some way, shape, or form. But to me, it really is just about making connections, putting yourself out there, having a strong presence on social media. And I think the second most important thing is being consistent. You don't want to do a do a reporting one day and then you're silent for a month or something. If you really want to be successful, I think in sports journalism, you have to be relentless. You have to be consistent, consistently putting work out there, and that's really where you have to just find opportunities. Ask, what can I do? It really is a self-motivating type of profession. But yeah, I would say really first and foremost, it's all about making those connections. I could probably go into a whole tangent, a 2-hour tangent about all the things you have to do to be successful. Some things I'm, still learning and working on as well. But if there's really anything I would, tell anyone, Stephen, it would be to make connections, meet people, and be willing to learn, because I'm still close with people who I met even before I came to OU. So you never know how long that connection is going to last, or what you can make with those connections. So really, just getting to know people who've had success in this industry, learning from them, being a sponge. I guess in terms of general in college, to me it's just find your people. I would say it was really hard for me moving from Northeast Ohio to Athens. Didn't really know a lot about OU and Athens and the campus vibe and things like that. But once I got to meet new people, whether that was in sports journalism or just playing pickup basketball at the gym, I eventually made new friendships, and it really helped ease my transition into the college life. So just in general, for anybody who's moving to college, especially if you're moving away from home, yeah, I would just say just make new friends, be open. Go to whatever events, social events are there. Do what you're passionate about, and it will eventually all come together. So
Yeah, that's wonderful. Darayus Sethna, thank you so much for being my special guest on this special edition of Stephen Interviews You. It's just been wonderful getting to know from somebody who's been there in Athens, Ohio, what it's like to be an Ohio Bobcat, because it is a special feeling to be an Ohio Bobcat, to be associated with that university. So, yeah. So anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. This has been Stephen Interviews You, episode 19 with Darayus Sethna. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll be back with more content soon. Take care, guys.